Evolutionary.org, episode 659 is coming your way. Today we have another special interview with our evil brother, Nasser199702. So you can go check him out on the forum. You can check out his logs. He's got several logs up. And if you go on the forum on the top right under the search by member, you can just put in his name, Nasser 1999702 or O2. O2, right, Nasser? Is it O2 or 02?
Yeah, and if anyone can figure out what that's a reference to, I'll be very impressed.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not Nasser somebody, is it?
Yeah, but the context around the numbers.
Oh, okay. The numbers. I don't,
Yeah.
maybe, I
That
don't
I
know.
don't know because I think the 94 Olympia was the one that they thought he should have won. So
Ooh,
I
no,
don't know.
close.
No?
Oh, so now
Night
we're
of the
getting some
Champion?
hints.
Ooh, see, it's annoying me now.
That's all right.
I know
Maybe
some of
you'll,
my.
maybe you'll spit, you'll spill it at the end of this podcast, so you guys can listen in to find out.
Yeah,
Bribe him,
yeah,
Steve. Bribe him.
yep.
So look, at the end of the day, we're gonna go over some really cool stuff. Nasser, he's prepared a lot for the show. He's a really bright guy. So this is gonna be a great episode. He's gonna really go over a lot of stuff. It's gonna be a great learning experience for a lot of you out there to pick up some of his knowledge that he's picked up over the years. First, we remind everybody first, we are on Apple, we're on Spotify, different platforms. Smash the like button, subscribe, leave comments, all that good stuff. It helps the algorithms pick up the podcast, of course. So that's how you can help. This is a community podcast, so it belongs to all of you listening to this. So with that said, thank you for coming on, Nasser. Really appreciate you coming on. How you doing this evening?
Oh, I'm good, man, and thanks for having us, guys.
Mobster?
So, Nasir, one of the things that we like to do with these shows, and again, I'm fully aware of the time difference where you are as a part of that equation, is and this applies especially to Oz listeners coming onto these shows. They can't be done without guests, and they certainly can't be done without guests like Nasser that's coming on. I'm going to say it's going to be something stupid like 9 or 10 o'clock at fucking night, if not later, to do these shows for us. So we want to make a particular point of thanking you for that. And I think the other thing which is important is the community, which is made up of people like Nasser, putting out this kind of information for the benefit of the listeners, not just entertainment and a little bit of backstory to give you guys an idea of what it's like, but also putting out educational and information for people to benefit from, so you don't have to make mistakes. You can learn from how people recover from injuries and so on. So on behalf of myself, Stevesmi, the moderators, the bosses of the forum, the listeners, and the other members of Evolutionary, thank you for taking time out of your day to come on this show and help us put these shows out.
Oh, man, I think it's a completely fair trade for the amount of effort you guys put into running the forum. So it's, it's completely okay.
Appreciate it, buddy. So let's get into it. Let's get into your history a little bit because you have an extremely, one of the things we notice looking at your pictures, you have an extremely tight waist. And that's not something we have in America or in Canada, North America, just because the way our food quality is in our diets. So it's very, very impressive anytime I see that. So tell us a little bit about your history. Have you always been having like a really, really tight waist? Is that something you've been an ectomorph your whole life, or is it something that you've really had to work on?
I think a lot of the times when if you have a really good waist, and particularly in like circumference, unfortunately, I think that's just mostly genetic. Everyone in my family, particularly the males, have very narrow waists, and they're all pretty tall and slim, and I suppose naturally low body fat and quite athletic. So, like unfortunately, I don't think there's much you can do to bring your waist down. Maybe the food quality has something to do with it. I don't particularly think that the American food quality is as bad as the international community would think. I mean, we still have the same preservatives, we still have the same, mass farming. The only big difference that I could say that we would have in terms of our food quality to yours is all our beef is grass-fed instead of corn-fed. So I think Americans give them like are a little bit too hard on themselves. I think pretty much any first world country is going to have the same factory mass-produced food that the
But
Americans have. And
you guys don't have high fructose corn syrup.
yeah, but we still have the same high carbohydrate, high sugar snacks, whether it's high
Mm.
fructose corn syrup or it's sucrose
Mm.
syrup or whatever, it's still processed
Okay.
refined carbohydrates.
That's And then like another thing too, though, I think we have differently though, is the marketing. The food marketing here is extremely intense. Like they'll market athletes and celebrities to market junk food day in and day out. And I mean, they market that on TV. They market it so
We have this
much.
we have the exact same thing.
Okay.
All our athletes will sponsor the latest fast food burger, and
Yeah, yeah.
every single, and you go to the food aisle and there'll be a bunch of cartoon branded kids chocolate yogurts and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
it's just
What's the
it's
one
absolutely
So you think
yeah,
it's
it's
the
the
you think
same.
it's the corn? You think it's the corn?
No, no,
I was thinking of one.
I genuinely think that like tiny tight waists, it's genetic. Like I
Okay.
don't there's nothing special that I do
Okay.
that no one else does. And I do the things that people think give you a big waist. Like I take insulin, I take growth hormone. I eat like pretty big meals. Like I don't eat small meals during the day. Like I
Mhm.
suppose if you I don't practice vacuums, I don't even train abs. Um I do I've always been athletic, and I think also because I'm tall, it gives me like a taller frame. I think a lot of guys who have quote unquote blocky waists just because they're short.
Mm.
Okay. And then are you European in descent? Because most
Yeah,
Americans.
pretty much. Yeah,
Okay.
pretty much. Well, I guess anyone from a Western country, you're going to have some sort of European immigration.
Yeah. So when you say
You know,
genetics, though, then you see what I'm saying? So why is the genetics different in Australia than they would be in the US then if they're both
no, I'm not saying the genetics are different. I'm just saying that individuals who have good waists, it's going to be an individual genetic thing. Like there's Australians that have blocky waists. Like there's people, like there's guys on the forum from Australia who don't have like genetically good
gotcha.
waists. And at
Okay.
the same time, like I have a genetic, like I don't have the greatest legs, and my
Mm.
biceps don't look as great when I do like an overhead shot versus like a hands clasp shot. So we all got our genetic strengths and weaknesses, and
Yeah,
you sort of like if you're doing like any physique based sport, you would trying to display your positive traits and
Right.
hide your negative traits. Like Arnold, like he didn't have a great waist, but he would twist his hips when he posed
yeah.
or kind of hit a vacuum. You got to like you got to play the cards you're dealt.
I
Gotcha.
was going to say, in that particular regards, especially with what we've just been talking about, you want to hang on to that slim waist. You don't want to give that away. You want to thicken up the legs. You want to thicken up the shoulders because it's just going to give you that quote unquote freaky look.
Yeah, yeah. Like
Uh,
the whole time I've been training, a big part of like I added a second leg day pretty close to it, like during my log as I was feeling stronger.
mm,
And yeah, building up my legs has definitely been a point I've wanted to do. Like like I said, I think it is a genetic thing because nearly all the gentlemen in my family don't have the best legs. Pretty like gifted in terms of like upper bodies and good pleasing lines, but I mean, especially when you're taller, like, I think it's maybe a bit harder to get big legs. I don't know if that's just a like a cope or something though.
Well, I mean, if you have lankier legs and you have the same amount of muscle, right, in your calf, it's going to look like the peak is like, you know what I'm saying? It's like the peak is going to be a lot smaller, even though the muscle size is the same versus, how much the person weighs. That makes sense. Like I'm 5'6" and I have big biceps and big ass calves, but, and someone who's more lanky, who's, got the same amount of muscle as me and they're 6'4" and they have more lanky limbs, their muscles
Hmm.
aren't going to look as big. Does that make sense? Like the peak. So
Yeah, but I
you're gonna
felt
have
if I'm honest with myself, it's probably only been just recently that I've actually really taken a more aggressive approach to leg training. Like if I have to be completely honest with myself,
Mhm.
like any, recreational lifter, you train hard chest and you train back and shoulders and biceps, really hard,
Yeah.
and then maybe you don't put 100% into your legs. So it's only been recently where I've had like the look at myself in the mirror and gone, okay, no, you have to, you know,
Right.
put the same effort that you
yeah,
put into all your favorite body parts into legs.
yeah. I think for the younger listeners listening to this show, I could look around my gym, Steve, and maybe two or three of the younger guys squat. That's it. Swear to God, that's it. And I'm not there in the late afternoon when it's busy as fuck. But in the morning crowd of the younger guys that come in, I don't think I've seen anybody go over 3 plates and barely anybody go over 2 plates. So yeah, but we're all on different journeys. One of the things I was going to
Yeah.
ask you, just statistically, how tall are you, just out of interest?
6'1".
Okay, yeah, it's a couple of inches shorter than me, but nevertheless, yeah.
All
Yeah,
right.
any muscle. Yeah, yeah.
So
I'm
so
just
you
it's the
mentioned
big that taller frame, filling out the taller frame. That's all.
so you
The
mentioned on
Yeah.
your legs you've been starting to get more serious. When did you,
yeah.
really start getting into the PED use and that sort of thing? How
Yeah.
old
So
were
I
you?
guess
Yeah.
to take it back to the beginning, I started
Yes.
training when I was probably about 17, 18. And everyone in my family was athletic, and it was a particular family member who was really into bodybuilding, particularly bodybuilding. And I thought, okay, well, this sounds like a fun thing to do because I was always athletic, but I was never good in conventional team sports. I was always good in like individual athleticism. So I thought I'd try bodybuilding, and I always treated it like I never really had plans of like competing or being the best bodybuilder. To me, it's just okay, bodybuilding is a fun way to exercise, and it's a good way to get bigger and stronger and be healthier. Um, and I stuck with it. I never had any time off the gym, and I just decided to make it part of my routine. And I trained naturally for about 10 years, like really consistently. And I would go through, you know, peaks where I'd be really into it and I'd be training really hard, or maybe you just, maybe you go through a couple of years where you're just going through the motions, you pick up new hobbies, your life changes. But I was always consistent with the gym, regardless of my motivation levels or my goals. I always went, and I treated it like brushing your teeth. You just have to go to the gym.
Yeah.
And I think a big reason that I took it that way is because I got a really bit of good advice from a family member who said it's easier to stay in shape than to have to get back into shape.
Mm.
So if you were always relatively within striking distance of like your prime form, um, it's much easier than having to rebuild yourself. So even the periods of time where maybe I'd lost interest in the gym and I was out doing other hobbies, I would still make that time for at least 3 or 4 sessions a week, just so I wasn't going backwards. And I was just content to just to be a conventional, just gym bro, just go for the fun, go for the pump, go for the workout. I built a pretty decent natural base. And it wasn't until I was about 27, maybe 28, that I decided, or maybe a bit younger than that, maybe 26, I decided to experiment with my first couple of cycles. And and it wasn't that like I had any particular desire to compete. It was just sheerly out of curiosity. Like I'd always been natural for no other reason that I just didn't know enough about PEDs and I didn't care enough about it. But when I got a bit older and I was like, I'm going to give this a try and see what it's like. Because I think when you're natural for so long, you look at the idea of PEDs as this brand new next level. Like, this is what's going to unlock every dream of my physique, everything that's holding me back, and every goal I have. It's achievable if I just take the plunge into PEDs. Like, and you think, oh, that's what's going to separate me from everyone else. And that's the difference between me and Chris Bumstead or Arnold Schwarzenegger or whatever. And when I did my first PED cycle, I was honestly pretty underwhelmed because I think when you're natural for so long and you've been living the lifestyle, like I'd always prepped my own food and I'd always logged my workouts. When I did my first PED cycle, sure, I
Mhm.
gained like weight and I got stronger, but it wasn't this enormous step up that I had
What did
built
you
up in my head.
run? What were you running
I
as
was
your
going to
first
say,
So
cycle?
Steve.
I,
I was going to say, some of for again for the benefit of listeners, there's this thing where a lot of people, Steve, and we just said this on the last show. They imagine somehow that steroids are like a magic wand that your fairy godmother's going to wave and it's going to transform you from average Joe to Mr. Olympia or whatever else. Or that if I use steroids, I'd look just like you. No, you fucking wouldn't.
it's
So the
exactly how I
reality is,
felt. It's exactly how I
yeah,
felt.
they add something to your physique. They
Mm.
they they
Yeah.
enhance what you've
Yeah,
got.
I
There
think
is a
most
great
people are like that. They're like, wow, I thought I would get a lot more. And some people are like, wow, this is a big
God,
change.
yeah.
So
It
I
depends on
remember
your
Uh,
test levels. Yeah, go on.
yeah, during that period of time where I was younger, I was cycling. I remember every cycle milligram for milligram. So my first one, it was I did the conventional what everyone does, 250 milligrams of test and Anavar. I think that was 50 milligrams of Anavar a day for the first 6 weeks. So yeah, so it was 10 weeks of testosterone, 250 milligrams testosterone and F8, and 50 milligrams of Anavar for the first 6 weeks. And
right.
I was happy. Like I gained some weight and I gained some size. And then I started the PCT, right? And I did the conventional PCT. I took the 2 weeks for the Ester to clear and started the HCG, Clomid, and Novadex. And then, so this was like, 10 years ago, pretty much. And I remember at the time, the theory was time on, then time off. So if you're on for 10 weeks, you take your time plus the rest plus the PCT protocol, and that's how much time you would wait before you'd start your next cycle. So that's exactly what I did. And I did not enjoy the PCT experience whatsoever. I really didn't find the hormonal fluctuations pleasant whatsoever. The depression, the mood swings, it was absolutely terrible. That was probably the worst part of the PCT. And I did the PCT correctly.
What'd
I
you
just
do?
personally hated it. So
What was
I
your
did
PC?
so I had so when on my last injection on the 10th week, at the end of that 10th week, I started HCG. There was the 2 week break for the ester to start to clear. And then I started after that 2 week, I was still doing the HCG. I don't remember the dosages, I'm sorry. I think it would have been at the time, I think the convention was 500 units every other day, it may have been. And then the Novilidex was 40 milligrams for 3 weeks, and then 20 milligrams for 3 weeks. And the Clomid was, I believe, 50 milligrams for three
Yeah.
weeks, and then
So you
25 milligrams for
basically,
3 weeks.
there's a couple things I would have told you, right? The SERMs, way too much
And
on the SERMs, way too much.
and
Because that,
Aromasin, sorry. And then yeah, Aromasin,
and then
sorry.
you ran the aromas on top of it. So you basically crashed your estrogen. And
Yeah.
then,
And
and
that will lead me towards why I don't use AIs later on. So that's a good learning experience.
yeah. And a lot of times what happens, these old PCT protocols, I see people running 100, 200, even 300 milligrams of Clomid. It's insane. You just don't need that
Mm.
much. The blood work shows you don't need that much for it
And
to,
do you know what? That I think that was during a period of time where blood work wasn't super
yeah.
Yes.
people would mention blood
Yeah.
work, but it wasn't this thing where it
Yeah.
was like
It's,
now I get blood work infinitely more
yeah.
frequently. I think I got
Yeah.
blood work 4 weeks into my cycle just to confirm the test was real. And it was, oh yeah, sweet. Test is through the roof, and then I'll never look at it ever again.
Yeah.
Um, and
Yeah.
but I was young and I didn't, and that was my
Yeah.
first cycle.
And these
And then I
people,
think,
yeah.
no, go ahead.
I was gonna say that people parrot the same PCT over and over, and the same people parroting the same PCT, none of them are on PCT. They're on TRT because their PCT didn't work. So it's just
Mm,
like
I
that's
was
the
I was going to
hypocrisy
say
of
in
it.
regards to the blood test, Steve. Sorry, that this is the thing, right? So I was thinking, right, there's a great argument to be made for the traditional PCT protocol because people didn't know any better. But now, what's changed in the last few years is literally us going, get your bloods done, because then we can have an actual picture, for want of a better phrase, of exactly what's going on. And now we make tweaks and now we make adjustments. So it becomes a little bit more specific to you. And that's the great advantage. And it's a lot
mm,
easier worldwide, Australia, America, UK, whatever, a lot easier and a lot cheaper and a lot more accessible, be able to get hold of blood tests, do them for a reasonable price, and people are more comfortable putting the information out for the rest of us to have a look at. So again, that's another
mm.
reason why we encourage you to come on Evolutionary, because it's a lot
Yeah.
more like now than it used to be. Yeah.
So then my next cycle after that, I believe, was 500 test, 400 Deca, and I think like an idiot, I did like 4 weeks of Anadrol, 50 milligrams every single day for 4 weeks. And I do remember getting ungodly strong and gaining a lot of weight. But I do remember having very, very high blood pressure. And again, 10 years ago, people weren't talking about telmisartan. They weren't talking about, well, there's some people were talking about Cialis for pumps, but they weren't talking about blood pressure. And I probably had absolutely sky high blood pressure and horrible health markers. But again, there wasn't this emphasis on health and longevity. There was just this emphasis on, particularly because you're cycling, the idea is that, okay, you've got 12 weeks to make as much progress as you can.
Yeah.
Your
Yeah.
health takes a back seat, and let's just go hard, and you can tolerate it for 12 weeks. But had I actually taken care of my health, because I remember about halfway into the cycle, my blood pressure probably, I was getting like every time I'd bend over to change a plate on a bit of machinery or whatever, I just had this throbbing feeling in my head. And I would have had much better workouts had I monitored my blood pressure.
There's also an argument to be made. Again, this is just one of those things we learn from experience. You're not going to gain everything you're ever going to gain on your first cycle. You're going to gain lots on your first cycle, but you're not going to gain everything. And
Mm,
people get they like the sexy idea of doing this crazy shit and getting hench. But in reality,
Mm.
Steve and I have made this point many times. £5 this time, £5 the next time. You're in for the long haul. It doesn't have to be all done at fucking once. And you are seeing way more people use. I don't like this particular phrase, but it's applicable here. Health phase, where they will specifically look at their blood, so they make sure that their bad markers come back to within range. And something else, and this is just more of an observation from a few years ago. Fortunately, not now. A few years ago, some of the quote unquote gurus were giving out similar advice to you just mentioned, and people were getting fucked up. People were dying because they were paying attention to that and not to the health, not to the blood pressure. Recent years, just literally in the last 4 or 5 months, Steve, people that have had blood pressure issues or heart attack issues or whatever else. So it becomes a thing that we don't need to learn the fucking hard way. The information is out there for you guys. Talk about where you're coming up more in terms of your cycle stuff to date, and we'll get
Yeah.
into more
So
of the rest
to
of your journey as well.
so to speed through this, so then you obviously I went through a phase of cycle of taking compounds, coming off, taking compounds and coming off. And what I find is that while I did make progress, I would lose a lot of that during PCT and trying to maintain that naturally. I'm sort of the stance that I don't believe you can retain a lot of gains made during a cycle on your natural hormone levels. And I'm happy to debate that if there's dissenting opinions. But
That'd be another show, fella, because I would do that with you
yeah,
right now. But yeah, you carry on.
absolutely. Okay, we'll pen that in for later. So, but then I think through that process, I just genuinely lost interest. I think through that process of taking PEDs and then going off cycle, I think I started to lose the interest in why I started going to the gym anyway. Because I was sort of just I was chasing how I looked on cycle, and I knew I could never maintain that. So then and like everyone always says that, oh, once you do your first cycle, you're never coming off. I was genuinely that person that just came off. And I took I didn't touch anything for a good maybe 6, 7, 8, maybe 8 years. And that was like a lot of other things. I got more into my career and I got more into wanting to have a family. I was lucky that I was still able to have a family and I didn't have any effects that way. And then it wasn't until I'd gotten significantly older, and I'd finished having kids and I was on TRT, that I stumbled upon the forums. And I was sort of just a lurker for the longest time, just kind of reading things, kind of putting together information. And around the same time that I started TRT, I had been looking into like, well, I wonder what the current way to do things is now. Like I remember how it was when I was doing it. And then I sort of discovered how there's a more emphasis on health, a greater emphasis on maybe using smaller amounts for longer periods of time instead of doing a pretty aggressive blast and coming off, maybe having a period where you're using more compounds and then come down to TRT and then maybe go back to using more compounds and then come back down to TRT. And instead of just picking an arbitrary time that you're going to use a compound, you go by getting blood work and you get your blood work every 4 weeks and determine, okay, I'm still healthy. I can keep this, more aggressive compound use going, or okay, my health is starting to deteriorate. I'm gonna scale back and maybe cleanse out and go on a bit of a health phase, as you would say. And then I think it got to the stage where I transitioned a lot. I was still going to the gym and I was still doing, conventional weightlifting and bodybuilding. And I still had quite a good physique, even as a natural. I've always quite lean and I had nice shape. And I wasn't too really fussed with how big I could potentially get because I remember being bigger when I would cycle and I enjoyed it, but I also enjoyed being smaller. I got really into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and I was doing that for my primary, I guess, like hobby. And I tried to move down a weight class because when we compete, you compete in weight classes. And unlike the UFC or those other combat sports where those guys will genuinely weigh in and then they will rehydrate the next day. So you can really aggressively weight cut and then rehydrate and
Yeah.
you weigh in at 145 pounds, but when you enter the cage, you're 160, 165 pounds or whatever it is. With jiu-jitsu, you weigh in the day you fight. Go ahead, Mobster. I saw you unmuted yourself.
No. I mean, I noticed you put something about welterweight at the beginning of your log, so I did
Yeah.
wonder what that was about. Yeah.
Yeah,
And I
so
was actually
welterweight,
thinking
yeah.
24 to 48 hours. It depends on the weigh in. So there are tricks. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I'd always competed at about 85 kilos. which I believe is middleweight. So I was trying to go down to 77, which is welterweight in jiu-jitsu. And I got down to that weight, but my cardio just, I could not maintain the same pace. I didn't have the same strength, and I would get really gassed really easily. And then I injured my groin and I needed surgery on it. So I was on TRT. Go ahead, Monster.
No, I'm just actually going to. I will ask you about recovering from an injury in a minute, but carry on to where you are. We'll bring that question back in a moment.
Yeah, no problem. So then I'd gotten the injury. I needed to get surgery, and a couple of things all happened at the same time. So I was already very, very lean from doing the cut. I had to take time off the gym for the surgery. I was browsing the forums and I'd reached out to Pharmabolics because I was actually wanting to get some ancillaries just because I was, even though I was on TRT, I was still taking things like melatonin and Cialis and what have you. And then he mentioned the idea. He actually brought the idea to me of being a logger, and I hadn't. And I originally just said, "Oh, I'm not really interested. Like, I'm happy to just do TRT or whatever. I wouldn't be interested in doing a cycle that I didn't think there'd be any interest in someone running 200 test and 100 EQ or 200 EQ and 250 test." But he kind of said that, no, yeah, I think it would be interesting for someone who to see maybe a conventionally a lower amount.
Yes.
And I thought, okay, all right, well, I'll give it a go. Like, and I thought, well, it's actually worked out pretty well. Like, I'm going to be recovering from this injury. I'll be able
Yeah.
to ramp up my training. I'm already very, very lean, so I should
Yeah.
have a pretty decent transformation. So it was just very lucky that it all happened at the same time.
Let me just pass a comment here, and it's again more for the
Mm,
benefit of those listening than for you because you're in it, you understand it. It's sexy as fuck and it's clickbaitable and it works for the algorithm for us to come on these shows and talk about mega cycles. We've talked about the late Monstro, Marco Louis, 6,000 milligrams a week. Like people at the gym will say, oh, I'm on 24 mil, and all these numbers get thrown around and whatever the fuck. And Nasser is a great example of you don't have to be doing crazy fucking shit to be really good at two sports in the gym and BJJ. You can still look fucking amazing. And there's always, this is the reason why we have different people on the show, there's always something to be learned, whether it's grams and grams and grams on a pro level cycle or it's the average Joe next door cycle. There's always information out there. Like I said, focusing just for a second here on the groin injury. We just talked about a shoulder issue on the last show. So you could say, look, guys, and I think I said this in your log, any tissue that you lost, any issues you had, because you put in the years, mind you, as a natural, and even the experiences you had with the initial cycles of PEDs, you will regain any losses as a result of the injury. And people could have a groin injury or a shoulder injury and learn how someone else functioned during that time and how they recovered and the rehab they had to do, and even the healing peptides that you might have run and so on and so forth, and learn from your experience. So there's always, it doesn't have to be grams and grams. It could be a low cycle, exactly like we're talking about right
Then
now.
also
Back to you,
on the flip side is I don't want to give anyone the false idea that they could make a similar transformation with those doses because I was in a lucky position where I was already very lean, I was already depleted. I probably would have gained a lot of size back naturally if I started eating again because I was on quite a low caloric restriction to get down to that weight. So I was already very lean. I probably had some muscle memory. So I would have gotten a lot out of just food alone. If you combine food and then training and some PEDs, of course I'm going to make great progress. And at the same time, I think I can get a lot out of this amount, but there will be a point where I will stall out. And the same thing happens with food and training. You have these levers you can push. You can push the calories up and you will gain weight, but eventually your physique will start to deteriorate. You can't just push the calories any higher because then you'll start to get your body fat will increase. So then you'll start to need to move the needle on the PEDs, and that will need to increase. I think a lot of people will see these pro level cycles and go, oh, grams and grams of gear. It's like, yeah, but they probably slowly built up to that. I'm sure they started at 250, then 300, then 350, then 500, then 600, 700, blah, 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 over many, many decades. So it scales up. And yeah, so I mean, that does apply. And and I don't think it's any better or worse that you can get away with more or less because I probably wouldn't have made the same progress if I wasn't already depleted and lean and
yeah,
had some muscle
yeah.
memory and had decades of history.
Yes.
So let's talk
It,
about while you're
sorry, I
on
was
this
just going to
subject.
say
All right, go ahead.
one thought again. One of the things that we used to be an old piece of advice, which I think applies here, and it says that, for example, if you have a short frame, if you have a heavy frame, if you are built for strength, then modeling yourself on someone like Frank Zane or whoever back in the day isn't the way to go. Equally, if you're tall and relatively lean and muscular, for example, and you mentioned him earlier on, you have a better waist, then Arnold Schwarzenegger would probably be someone to model on. So I would suggest to listeners again, we have different guests on all the time. Come onto the forums, check out the logs, and see the person that you think is closest to you physically, or even just in the aims of this person. So again, Nasser will be a good example of someone with a small waist, a decade or more pre-cycle experience, and learning from any mistakes that he's made and recovering from the injury. And he's been quite clear in that the progress he made, partly down
Yeah,
to the fact that he lost memory and so on. Yeah, go back to you,
we
Steve.
hear you, buddy. Yep. So let's go over. You talked about sustanon already. You really like 250 milligrams of sustanon. I was curious. I wanted to hear why sustanon. Why is the blend something that you like to do together? Why not just Testi or Test Sip? Then it says here 200 milligrams of equipoise a week. Tell us why you like equipoise. And then the retreat 1 to 2 milligrams. Tell us how you like that dosing. Have you changed it since you started? Do you go up? Do you go down? Do you cut it
Yeah.
off? Is that
So,
something you're going to be on for going forward? And one more thing, the
mhm.
Cialis 5 milligrams a day. That's something that I see a lot of people doing now. Do you notice that that's helping you with your heart health? Is that something a doctor recommended? What's getting you into the Cialis? Is that
Well,
something and that is that something you're going to be taking long term as
yeah.
well?
No, I'll break that down for sure. So the reason I came down to the Sustanon, it was the vendor did give me an option of what compound I'd like to run, and I would I guess I would I'm not fussy when it comes to test. I don't see a lot of difference between the esters. I think it just comes down to personal preference. I think a part of the allure of Sustanon is you just hear all the pros talk about Sustanon. And it sort of has this legendary reputation. And I guess the idea of multiple esters, all peaking at certain times is alluring. But I probably ruin it by doing daily micro injections anyway. So I don't know how much I get out of the blend. But I don't know. It just seems like there's a lot of human studies with sustanon. There's a lot of human studies with enanthate and cypionate. So those are the three esters that I would genuinely trust. I don't like cypionate. I think I like cypionate the least out of those three, mostly because there is less science and studies on it. I prefer enanthate or sustanon, but realistically, if you want an honest reason why I picked sustanon, it's just because I thought, that'd be a bit of fun to try, and I like the idea of sustanon. But I don't think it's any better than any other testosterone ester. And in terms of why I picked Primo Equipoise is from my experience with doing PCT, I never enjoyed SERMs or AIs. I always found I got bad mood effects, and I'd always find that my joints would dry out really, really bad. And I'd always theorized that equipoise and primobolan would lower estrogen because anytime I'd ran primobolan or equipoise when I was cycling, I always noticed I had really, really low estrogen. But it wasn't the done thing. Everyone always said, regardless of what you're running, you've always got to run your aromasin at 12.5 milligrams every other day. And you would just see your estrogen absolutely go to the floor. And you think you're doing everything right, and you probably didn't. And I didn't realize at the time that there is something about equipoise and primobolan that controls estrogen. And when I was thinking about doing a cycle, I was like, you know what, like I'm gonna test this out, and I was pretty confident in the science. In terms of why I picked equipoise over primobolan, I'm pretty conscious about losing my hair. It sounds vain and silly, but I like having hair. I've still got a good head of hair, and I didn't lose any of it with my experiments. And I take finasteride. I don't want to have to get a hair transplant, and weighing up primobolan versus equipoise, I wasn't expecting a lot more anabolism from a secondary compound. Obviously, there is some, but it was primarily to use it as an AI. Uh, and because equipoise is not a derivative of DHT, less effect on the less effect on the hairline. Also, I with me doing jujitsu, the increased red blood cell count and hematocrit is actually pretty good for the endurance boost. I got a pretty sizable boost to my cardiovascular strength, the cardiovascular performance with equipoise. And I think I preferred equipoise any other time that I'd ran it to primobolan. Don't get me wrong, primobolan is a fantastic compound, and if you're not worried about hair loss, or you have just an invincible hairline to DHT and you can afford it and you can find real primobolan, it's a great compound. I always just found that equipoise is so less likely to be faked. So I can always trust I'm getting real equipoise. And in terms of the
Cialis.
other
Cialis. Talk about the
Cialis, yes,
Cialis
yeah.
a little bit. Yeah.
So the Cialis was something that I started to control blood pressure. I'd always had good blood pressure, but to me, it made sense to have optimal blood pressure. So I treat managing blood pressure the same way that you would treat any other health factor. So if you would go on TRT, you may have good natural testosterone, but you want really good natural testosterone. So you want it to be at top of the reference range. I always had good blood pressure, but I wanted really good blood pressure. So the Cialis has a nice effect in lowering blood pressure, not by a pretty dramatic amount, but enough to keep your blood pressure in the very good range, where normally it would be maybe 120, 115. Now my blood pressure is pretty consistently 105 or 110. Although I did recently switch not recently, maybe a couple of weeks ago, I took the Cialis out and am using telmisartan instead. The only issue I found with the Cialis is that it would just give you pretty um frequent erections during the day, and it was just an undesired side effect. I had no issue with my libido and I didn't need it to be
Mm.
revved up anymore.
Yeah, so it's kind of ironic because, of course, as I said on other shows, that most of the ED drugs were actually originally developed to treat blood pressure, and
Mm.
the erection quality was actually one of those. How are you getting on with the medication? And people that were part of the study said, yeah, there's this interesting side effect that's going on, and it ended up being a
I
problem. It's
actually
very dose. Yeah, I was going to
I
say dose dependent. I'm surprised that you had that
yeah.
particular issue just on 5 milligrams.
Well, because I was taking it every single day, and I think also, uh, yeah, I just and don't get me wrong, I mean, like for sexual health, it's fantastic.
Of course.
But I switched it for telmisartan and at 10 milligrams, and I just found that was a bit more comfortable. But
I just had a conversation about 35, 40 minutes ago with a neighbour, very quickly grabbing some steps. Did a heart attack 6 weeks ago, guys. He's on a pacemaker right now. And do the Cialis thing, 100%. Do the baby aspirin every single day, 100%. Something I've been mentioned on the forums is beet juice, which is a natural vasodilator and again helps with your blood pressure. So again, these are the things that we need to be aware of when we're on cycle. And I like the fact that Nasser is
I
keeping an
want
eye on
to.
these things and addressing them in a particular way that
and
you
Yeah,
and
we
like.
not
hear you. Yep. I want to
yeah,
ask
not to
them.
over talk, but it's just quickly, Steve,
Yeah, go
something that
ahead.
people don't understand is that blood pressure is a very good indicator of if you're healthy. If your blood pressure is high, it's a sign that something is wrong. And blood pressure is very easy to check at home. These devices are like $20 at
Yes.
any
Yeah.
pharmacy. And if your blood pressure is good, there's a good chance you're okay. But like a lot of the times it's hard to find, like, oh, why am I feeling this way? I don't know what's going on. Just get your blood pressure checked. And if that is wrong, then you have somewhere to start. It could be because it could be a sign that one of your organs is not working, or maybe your diet's bad, or you need to lose some weight. Blood pressure and blood pressure is a very easy thing to manage. It's a
AK.
silent killer. You leave blood pressure high for too long, that's what will kill you before any kidney failure or any liver failure will.
It's amazing when people run steroids. You can go from great blood pressure. This happened to me. after my first cycle. I went from great blood pressure to horrible blood pressure just on one cycle because I gained so much weight and I gained so much water weight. It really strained everything. I want to ask you too about the Cialis. Does it make you tired? And also with the finasteride, any concerns about long-term issues? I've heard over the years from people who have said finasteride has caused long-term erection issues, libido issues. Is that something that you've ever experienced? What do you think about that? Do you think that's just people
Yeah,
exaggerating? What's your thoughts on it?
I've been very lucky with my experience with finasteride. I haven't had any side effects. And I'm not one of these people that will claim that there is no side effects from finasteride. There, any pharmaceutical or any drug that you put into your body, there is going to be side effects. So you have to monitor those and take very good precautions. You wouldn't just put anything in your body without knowing all the risks that could potentially happen. I've had friends who were losing their hair, and I said, try finasteride. And they got really depressed. They had issues with their erections, issues with their sex drive, and then the side effects were not worth the effect of keeping your hair. So I'm just been lucky. I do get my blood test, and when I get my blood test, I check for dihydrotestosterone, because I think that if you crash that too far, that's when you get side effects. Because the issue is that finasteride is when people take finasteride, they either take the 1 milligram tablet or the 5 milligram tablet. When, if you think about testosterone dosage, right, you take a dose that gets you the amount
Yes.
of testosterone you
Yes.
want. People should
Yes.
treat finasteride the same way. Maybe a whole 1 milligram tab that you would normally get is going to destroy your DHT level. So maybe you get a blood test, maybe you only need half, or
Yeah.
maybe you need 2 milligrams, maybe you need three, maybe you need four. Don't just take the medicated dose because it could be different for you.
We just had, I think, was a comment on the forums the other day, late last week, guys, where a family member had become ill. The member on the forums had been looking at some peptides, had actually got these peptides for the family member. They went back to the doctors, and to use the phrase, the family member that had been ill was so much better. I was going to say they were cured. That might be a slight exaggeration. So that was our sort of working knowledge and thinking the way that you are, Nasir, logically, the approach, just because the dose is X. I mean, look, doctors will quite often tweak dosages of medications when you're in hospital because although there may be a guideline, maybe you have a worse or better condition. This applies again even to what you were talking about earlier. Someone could do the same cycle as you, but be fat when they start,
Mm.
or shorter, or thicker jointed. They will not get the same results if they have the same condition as you, if they're as lean as you. This is applicable to the estrogen control, for example. Let me move you on a little bit because I'm
Hmm.
actually going to pick up one of your topics. You said, my passionate stance against oral only cycles and how I think
Yes.
orals are best for you. So, again, this is one of those, me and you could debate this, but I want your opinion, not my opinion. So, give us your opinion on the oral only cycle thing.
So I am passionately against the idea of oral only cycles. And most of there's two main reasons, right? When you are taking any anabolic, it is suppressive to your natural hormone production. Now, people will
Yeah.
claim, or some are less or more suppressive. Suppression is suppression,
That's
and
the phrase
people
I've
don't.
used many, many times. It's
Yeah,
still suppression. You're just arguing
right.
across about how much of a break you're putting on. Go on.
Now, and also, you are suppressing your endocrine system. Your endocrine system is incredibly important to many functions of your body. It's not as simple as high test means more muscle. Your testosterone controls your brain, your organs,
Yes.
your mood, everything. Now, if you turn off your testosterone and replace it with synthetic testosterone, that's okay because you are replacing with a bioidentical and bioavailable hormone. That's why you would do TRT. When you take testosterone, your body stops producing its own and you are supplying it with synthetic testosterone. Now, that works when you're doing testosterone. But if you start taking a D-bol only cycle, for example, or an anavar only cycle, for example, you're shutting down your testosterone production and replacing it with oxandrolone, which is anavar, which is not bioidentical to the body. It is a derivative of a bioidentical hormone, which is DHT, which is a hormone that testosterone converts into. So you're 2 steps removed from the actual hormone that makes you healthily function as a male and as a female. Now, I understand when people are brand new to this thing, this can be quite kind of confusing. And the idea that maybe an oral only cycle is somehow safer. But once you know a bit more about PEDs, you learn that orals are actually the most toxic out of all of the anabolics. They're the ones that are digested by the liver twice in many cases, and they're the ones that cause the most organ stress, most liver stress, and the most side effects. So this idea that an oral only cycle is safer, it's actually the worst thing that you can do to your body because one, you're turning off your hormone production, replacing it with a hormone that isn't the hormone you've turned off, and then you're smashing your organs with some of the most toxic with the most toxic versions of steroids.
So
I think a lot of people,
I would argue against multiple points here, but again, this
go
is
ahead.
Nasser's show, not my squad up because we've only got 15 or 20 minutes left, and we'll be on this subject for the next 15 or 20 minutes. So, for example, just as one example I've given on the shows, without arguing the point, I said the problem we sometimes have when we're comparing orals with injectables is we almost never do, is compare like with like. Just as an example, your own most recent cycle in terms of the Sustanon and the EQ was approximately 450 milligrams, and that's without the finasteride, et cetera, that you're also taking. You also referenced insulin and growth hormone earlier on. Whereas an oral, for example, if you ran just D-bol, typical dose of D-bol would be 30 to 50 milligrams. Let's say it's 30. That's 210 milligrams total. So the idea, of course, injectables, quote unquote, are safer. Yes, but again, it's a dose for dose thing. So we're going, if I use 1,000 milligrams of an injectable, and if I want it to be picky, I could say one of the harsher injectables like Tren, I can't then compare that against, say, for example, 210 milligrams, a low dose of Dynabol. I need to compare like with like. So the stresses on our body. And again, it's one stress. What else are we fucking doing? We're dieting, we're training our asses off. We might be restricting calories. Might not be hydrated. There's so many factors at play. Again, this goes back to your point earlier on about the blood test. So again, you do say how I think orals are best used. So if you did run an oral cycle, how would you best use an oral cycle?
Now,
Or
I
oral in
do,
this case.
I do like orals. I'm not going to say that I don't. I think that anytime you're using any PED, you should have a testosterone base. So if you and I think that the 99% of your progress will come from testosterone and maybe a secondary compound like equipoise or primobolan, nandrolone, whatever. I think that there's 2 times I think that orals come into play. First of all, for pre-contest. So if you're dieting for a show,
Yes.
the last, you might use Superdrol or Anadrol or Winstrol, whatever, to really harden up when you're very, very lean. Most people who are recreational lifters are not going to get lean enough to see those benefits. The second option is you do get a significant performance boost from an oral pre-workout. So, like powerlifters will take, D-bol or Anadrol or I guess Superdrol as well, for the really massive strength boost. So I do like orals, but I like them as a pre-workout. And I think that you can get a lot out of less orals if you're using a testosterone base. So instead of needing 30 milligrams of D-bol, if you're going to do a D-bol only cycle, even if you would use a baseline testosterone of a TRT dose, so you could experiment with D-bol, you could get away with 10 milligrams or 20 milligrams pre-workout and get significantly better gains.
The argument for the D-bol, the dosage that Nasser's just made, actually applies with the history stuff that Steve and I have done, because back in the day, the guys were only, when they first come out, Steve, and they were being experimented on by the York guys, they literally all they were fucking doing to begin with was 5 or 10 milligrams a day, and still seeing results on their Olympic lifts, going up in just a few pounds body weight, etc., on what we would now think of as a pre-workout dosage. Something you put here, and this is more of your latter point in your suggested topics, PED doses, pros versus average gym bro. So as I said earlier on, it's sexy to read what, and I say that in terms of the algorithm and impact for people listening. It's sexy as fuck to give the idea of what a pro level stack might be versus doing, and I think it's part of what Nasser was just talking about, what you need to do for you. So talk about the
Mm.
differences between pros and gym bros and your thoughts on that.
Well, I think a lot of times people will see the really high milligram dosages for these IFBB pros, and they will assume, okay, well, that's what every pro needs to take to get to that level. And that may be true for some of them. And same people will say, oh, they're lying, they take more, they're lying, they take less. It's what I mentioned before. You might not need that right away. Like you might grow on, you know, 500 milligrams total of anabolics and 3,500 calories. But eventually you will need more calories and eventually you may need more anabolics. So don't take what a pro would do because you wouldn't start on a pro's caloric intake, would you? And you wouldn't start on a pro's maximum bench press, would you? You would slowly work up to that bench press, you would slowly work up to that caloric intake, and you would slowly work up to that anabolic load. So I think that that's something that people need to consider is
I'm going to just jump in here for a second.
Mhm.
It's weird how in bodybuilding, and specific when it comes to PEDs, we would never put someone who's never driven into a Formula One racing car and expect them to even get the fucking thing around the track. We would never
Mm,
put the top Wimbledon player up against someone that's never played tennis before. And yet, when it comes to PEDs, sometimes younger listeners, newbies, people that haven't done the research will go, well, everybody needs to be on grams and grams and grams. That's how you get big. No, you wouldn't do any of the other things. We're not going to let you fucking fly a kite and then jump into a Saturn V rocket
mm.
and go to the moon.
Because
You
yeah,
need
you have to look at it logically. Like a 300-pound pro bodybuilder is probably not going to feel 200 milligrams of test, and and 1,000 calories and 2,000 calories from him is going to be two meals. So it's unrealistic to think that they wouldn't be using more, but it's also
Mm.
unrealistic to think that you would need that because you probably weigh 100 pounds less than them.
I think you've also, as any person that's done these shows with us, you would have learned over time what's worked, what hasn't worked. Give us an example of where, in terms of PDs, maybe you've made a mistake and you've learned from your mistake that might benefit listeners as well.
I think a big mistake is that thinking that you need to run certain compounds because it's what everyone else does and gets a lot of benefit from. When I ran DECA, I hated the experience. I did not enjoy it one bit. And so that's kind of shows that there might be certain compounds that just don't agree with you. And you know, you might not like DECA, you might not like EQ, you might not like Primobolan. You might not like PEDs at all, realistically. Maybe you don't like growth hormone. There's not Everyone's going to have something that responds to them differently. Just the same way, not everyone likes can tolerate the same medication. Some people can't take
So let
Viagra
me.
because it gives them heart issues.
I hate to interrupt you,
Mm.
but why do you think that is? You sound like a smart guy. You seem, what
Well,
what is your reasoning? Is it the genetic thing? Is it something else?
I think it's probably like everyone's like response to things is so different. Like you would see someone who maybe would drink whiskey and get like a really angry drunk, and you would see the same another different person drink whiskey and maybe get a really chill drunk. I think the
Mm.
way people metabolize things is going to be very different because the human body is so complicated. And maybe someone is born with maybe they're just genetically more prone to prolactin or progesterone. So when they take DECA, they just get prolactin and progesterone like crazy.
Yep.
Maybe some people, they're very low aromatizers. So when they try EQ or Primobolan, it crashes their E2 and they feel like crap. But on DECA, they feel great because maybe it boosts the naturally low E2. That's why blood work, blood work, blood work. You can nearly any time you don't feel good on a compound, you can answer that with blood work. And
Something we
that's
see
what
on the
frustrates.
forums
Yeah.
is the reason that you got a log, obviously, that's what we're referring to in this show. We quite often, and this again for the benefit of listeners, we will ask certain bits of information that people forget to include in their opening post, or especially when they've just started a log. If, for example, you forget to mention your age, literally how you respond to PEDs at X age versus 10 or 15 years later is different. Your body fat, the medications that you're on. People will talk about PEDs, but they'll forget to mention the prescription medications they're on and even the side effects of prescription medications. And we know that they do because we see the white papers that come with them. We can look them up. And again, it's a
Mm.
percentage of people. 1 in 100,000 gets X, 1 in 10,000 or 10 in 10,000 will get Y, and so on. So all of these parameters are applicable. I do like that's it more than anything else, Steve. I think is what they call a logical thinker, because you're asking the right questions of yourself. You're looking at what specifically applies to you, and then say, why did that happen, or why didn't that happen? What am
And
I
I think
doing?
that's something that I think a lot of people who are maybe new to this idea don't consider when they decide to walk down the route of being enhanced.
Mm,
There's way more things to consider than just a $65 bottle of test. You need to
yes.
make sure that you are willing to get blood work. Now, I think blood work is not expensive. And if you can't afford blood work every 4 weeks, you have no business
Yeah.
doing PEDs. If you
Yeah.
can't afford the ancillaries, you have no business doing PEDs. If you're worried about your future fertility, maybe wait until you've had kids. If you're 21 and you want to look like your favorite Twitch streamer who's hot right now, and you've poisoned your brain into thinking that the only way a woman's going to find you attractive is if you get jaw surgery and start blasting tests at
Yeah, we
21.
know you mean.
Test test is not PEDS is not for you. There's
Isn't
so
that
much.
hasn't that person just been fucking arrested for running someone over? Like, no, I actually got sent
Oh,
a DM. I got sent a DM by a member saying this is a person that some of the youngsters are looking at. Run. I went and looked him up. I thought, what the fuck is this shit? He's
and I think that
borderline
that's just.
psychopathic.
And look, I'm not gonna brag on the younger generation because every
Yeah,
generation
yeah,
had
yeah,
their
yeah.
like had their
Yes,
had
yes,
their bad boy who steered them down the wrong path and made a career for themselves being a provocateur. But if any young people are listening to this, and I think the young people are more the ones who will ask about oral only cycles. There's two main things I want younger people to know. Um, First of all, please, if you want to do PEDs, there's only two reasons you should do PEDs. One is because you think you're going to be a pro IFBB bodybuilder, and the second is because you just want to experience them. Now, to answer you will know if you're going to be a pro IFBB bodybuilder because
yeah,
you will be massive naturally. You will be big as a natural, and people will think you're on gear already. And if that's not you naturally, you're not going to be a pro. I'm sorry, pick a new sport. Secondly, now then you fall into the category two where you just want to experience what it's like to use PEDs. If that's you, please do everything else in your life first. Get a career, have a family, look after your
yeah,
health, because there are so many more things you need to sort your life out before you go down this path. Because if you can't afford blood work, you can't afford to go to the hospital, you can't afford ancillaries, you can only afford the test. What are you going to do when it all goes wrong? Sure, you don't want kids now at 21, 23, but you might want them later, and you could do
yeah.
long-term damage to yourself. And the last thing I want to say to these young people, don't do oral only cycles because you think injecting hurts. It doesn't. It does not hurt at all.
I'm going to ask you a couple more questions before we
Go
finish the
for it.
show. Talk about, I mean, away from that, because me and you could preach for our countries, no problem.
Mm.
Being on Evolutionary, what's the difference that being on Evolutionary has made to you? And have you got any final thoughts? No, what's the other one, Steve? Sorry. Any logs or people on the forums that have been very helpful for you?
Um, Look, I'm not a big social media person, and I don't really have a presence on any social medias. What I really found is I couldn't believe how like positive and friendly and open and
Mm,
informative the forum was. I just sort of stumbled upon it. I don't even know how I found it. But the surface internet is full of such angry dickheads and really horrible people. But then this obscure little underground forum I found is full of the most friendly, nice people on the planet. With all this, just a shared passion for lifting weights and having bodily autonomy, which is a big reason why I'm very pro ped use, is because I think we deserve to have bodily autonomy. And I've learnt a lot on the forum and gotten a lot of really good advice and been able to source, really good, clean products from a lot of the verified vendors.
Yeah, one of the things I tell people is if you're an asshole, don't come to Evo. We don't want you.
no,
Go to a different
no.
forum. So
We can have a
that's
difference
not
of
that's what we want.
opinion, but
Yeah.
one of the things I
Yeah.
sometimes, Steve's done it with me. I came on a couple of shows right at the beginning when Steve and I were doing shows, and I had a particular opinion that had been founded on something I've been doing for years in terms of PEDs. We had a couple of shows, we went over the topic, we discussed it, and I was like, the fuck was I thinking that for? I literally changed my mind on that particular thing. So one of the things, and I like this about Evolutionary, If someone else has a particularly strongly held, doesn't have to be wrong, a strongly held view, and they can back it up with the thought process that's gone behind it, you might fucking learn something. Equally, I might be able to persuade them that they're wrong by my thought process and my backing up what I'm saying. So you learn all the time, guys.
Yeah,
This is
and
the
you also
thing.
have to be
Yeah.
you have to be okay with the idea that you might be wrong.
Yes. Don't hold to it because you're a stubborn bitch. Hold on to it
Mm,
because you're right. If you're
mm.
wrong, you change your fucking mind. It's not the world's worst thing. Right? If you
Yeah.
anybody that's been in a relationship soon learns that fucking one. I've made a couple of mistakes in that regard and realised I was bitching about something for 15 minutes.
Sometimes sometimes
Yeah,
being wrong it can be the best thing because then you get to
because you
learn something
learn.
brand new.
Yes,
Yes.
yes. What about any
And it
standout on the forum? Anybody stands out? We've had a couple of
do
shows
you know
where
what?
guys.
I think there's one of my favorite logs to follow is this female logger called Jigglybuff.
Yes,
Holy hell, she is diced. She has an insane physique. And it's
and a
one of
big
those
thinker,
things,
a big logical thinker again, fella.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah. And do you know what's crazy is, and I don't mean to like foo-foo anyone on the forums, but there's only so many logs you can read of
yeah,
test trend GH, test trend Anavar, test Deca GH, and you know when we're guys, we're all sort of training the same way, heavy compound movements. We're either eating
mm.
heaps, and we all sort of end up doing something similar, right? And then and then the standouts will sort of just determine, okay, who's got really good genetics, who trains really hard, and what have you. But with
Yeah,
the female logs, it's much different because it's completely different drug metabolism, it's completely different cycles, it's completely
yes,
different training, very different. And it's not that, and I'll be honest, I don't follow competitive female bodybuilding, but I do follow the log because I find it really interesting because it's radically different to what I do. So
mm.
that's one of the logs I like to find.
Even
There is a
just the fact that it's holding your interest. As you
yeah,
said, you don't want to read, I have four boiled eggs for breakfast every fucking day. That's going to be mind
mm,
numbing. If the person makes progress or if they learn something
yeah,
or
do
they
like a
write about something else, yes.
yeah, I want to read a log that's basically just mine, just a different guy. Um, but then there's a user, I can never remember the name. He's a gentleman in a wheelchair, super
Yeah.
inspirational. I love reading that because it just shows the indomitable human spirit that you can
Yes.
have that setback and determine, all right, well, this is the situation I'm in. I'm going to move forward with what I have. And I find that really motivating.
We had him on. We had two. We've done Will's 85 is the first one,
Wheels
and we had
85.
another
I was going
member.
to say Wheels 87, but I didn't want to say the wrong
Yeah,
number.
Will's 85 was one, and we had another member on last week who'd fallen the best part of 100 feet, 30 something meters, down a very steep grassy embankment. And what the main topic of that particular show, just to finish this particular thought, guys, as we go into the end of the show, was, as you said, the spirit. I said you wrote something to the effect of, I made the decision that being in a wheelchair wasn't going to define me. And I said, I love that. No bollocks, let's fucking grab life by the balls attitude. And that, when we all think we've got hard lives and stresses and whatever, this guy's in a wheelchair, he broke his fucking spine, he's never going to walk again, and it's not going to define him. So that attitude we can apply to ourselves when we're having a shit day. Again, guys, just as we're finishing this particular show, I want to thank Nasser for coming on. I love the logical thinking process. We could do another fucking hour just talking about the stuff you and I could go over.
Oh,
People
yeah,
will
bring it
listen
on.
to this. Yeah, people will listen to this show, agree or disagree, debate or won't debate. Come onto the forum and tell us we're both talking bollocks, whatever. Um, you will learn something. And this is a process that Nasser's gone through earlier till now. He's still learning, Steve's still learning, I'm still learning. New stuff comes out all the time. People go over old processes and pick the bones out of it and realize where we went wrong. And that's something that we like to encourage with the new GLP that's just come out, for example, just recently, 4 different ways of impacting your body. So listen, guys, stuff happens all the time. One thing that bodybuilders have been very good at is if something new comes along, we tend to go off and we get the access to the studies now that we never had before. So we're constantly learning. So I love that you come on today and give us that sort of insight as well. As always, please note we are not doctors and the opinions are ours. It is our view based on our experience and views on the topic. A podcast for informational purposes and entertainment only. the freedom of speech and the First Amendment apply.